procedures on the screens. We're all well versed in the space, but make sure that we're keeping safe as well as our phones being on silent is much appreciated. Welcome everybody to today's meeting of Committee Kaupapa, the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee. We're now going to open with karakia. So they'll be put up on the screens. Please feel free to join in. Me noi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ātakura, he tuo, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. For apologies today, have had none come through, noting that Councillor Brown is online. Tēnā koe, Councillor. Moving on, those members here that are not members.
Potentially. So.
Thank you, noted. We've got a number of committee members and actually councillors here as well that aren't on committee. Thank you for attending. As already pre-discussed, if you're not a committee member, you cannot vote on the papers today, but you will be able to ask questions and participate in discussion. Conflicts of interest, are there any conflicts to declare? Councillor Mitchell.
Chair, I have a number of conflicts with the paper that's about updating on the climate action pathway, although there's no decision to be made there, so I'm not sure I need to declare those.
There is no decisions. Is there anything outside of your normal conflicts of interest that have been already approved from council and declared? All on the list? Great, thank you very much. Any further conflicts? Great. So now we're moving on to our first report for the day on page 6, which is opportunities to reduce recycling contamination. Welcome to the table, Ewan Schutzer, Head of Climate and Waste and Resource Recovery, as well as Jessica Heyman, Senior Advisor, Waste Planning and Strategy. And so firstly, thank you both for your work on the report. Jessica will be leading the discussion on this today. If there's any opening remarks that you wish to make, please do so, but note the report has been read by all members, so highlight any areas that you want us to pay particular attention to.
Thank you very much. Nothing particularly new to add since the council briefing last week. So just as an overview, if it's helpful, the report provides information on the work undertaken to date, as well as opportunities we've identified from an initial analysis for further opportunities to reduce contamination below that target of 10%. The citywide recycling contamination levels are varying significantly, but by way of update, it's the same as it was reported last week, but as of 2023-2024, our annual average is about 14.6, having come down from 17.9 in 21-22. Yes, so the paper itself obviously goes through the measures undertaken to date, and then we set out 10 opportunities grouped into 3 general themes and assess them under an initial analysis. But the only thing to note, I guess, as we go, as the paper's discussed, is as highlighted in the paper, investigating and implementing a wide range of options may have impacts on the prioritisation of current work programs. I think that's everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. Questions from members? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I had a couple, and thanks for the paper and the briefing the other day. It's very thorough. One of the questions I had in paragraph 12, there was a link provided or discussion of regulatory requirements for reporting. So I clicked on the link and had a read of the MFE paper on there, and I was interested to note that scoop testing is not their preferred option for measuring contamination rates and reporting on them. So have we had to think about whether scoop testing is the right way for us to continue to measure contamination, or considered any change there?
I can maybe briefly talk to this. At the moment, the scoop testing method is what we use, and we're not planning any change to this. That's partly, ideally you'd have a mass balance system where you measure the amount of material coming in, and then you measure or deduct the material that's actually waste coming out. because the facility services 3 different, in fact, more than 3 territorial authorities, and that material gets, trucks come into the facility, unload their waste, and it's effectively mixed at that point. The scoop testing happens before the mixing, so it's very difficult to then disentangle that if contamination rates are quite different between the different councils, as seems to be the case. So at the moment, it's not the preferred option, but it's the best that we currently have available.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, and a great report. Some really good stuff in there. But it's really disappointing that it's noted here in paragraph 22 that only a few households contribute to the issue. And there's an obvious disregard, for systems in place. So have we made approaches to educate through schools, marae, churches in those areas that are prone to this contamination?
Thank you for your question. Just recognising I'm quite new to the team, but I can speak to what I know to date. In terms of engagement directly with areas, sort of hotspots of contamination, there have been targeted flyer drops done in the past. One of them is pictured in here, and it was intended to try and activate social norms, so saying, look, your area, people do care here, but we really need people to step up their game and follow the contamination guidelines and rules. The other aspect is that we've got the EnviroSchools program, so we work with schools across the region, and they're doing really great work on educating children in schools. And as I understand it, I think there are different ways to provide the receptacles themselves to schools and marae as opposed to residential areas as well. So hopefully if there's feedback to come through those loops, that's things we're receiving too.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, just a question regarding our sticker system, particularly referring to page 46. And it might be superseded by some of the RFID solutions we're now talking about, but it tells us that sometimes there can be a 6-month time lapse before a residents will get another visit from our ambassadors. But I presumed if a bin has been stickered, it's a known household that's got a contamination problem, we go back earlier than six months. Well, hopefully we go back at the next recycling round to check that they got the message.
Yeah, to confirm that. So once a red sticker has been applied, they get added to a revisit list. And so that property gets revisited actually quite several times because sometimes the bin's not out. So it might take several goes, but they are added to the revisit list to make sure that they are revisited, and then they go through that 3 strikes approach before the bin is removed, if that needs to happen.
Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. I was interested to read about the RFID suggestion on page 32, that the existing technology is available based on rollout elsewhere in the country by Waste Management New Zealand. And I was just curious if we could could ask for some case studies on where this particular technology has been rolled out and what the impact has been.
Sorry, unfortunately, you referred to the page number. Unfortunately, our page numbers are different to the ones in Diligent.
Okay. Well, it's.
Do you have the paragraph?
It's in the table of options.
Oh, yeah.
It's option J.
Yep. Okay.
RFIDs, and there's a column about implementation timeframe.
So RFIDs are in use in some councils, and we've been informed that in Napier, there is a system that they are looking at implementing at the moment to make better use of that approach. So we are currently working with Waste Management to see if we can learn based on that system that they have. At the moment, the way the RFID system works in the Hutt, we can't prevent a known contaminated bin from being lifted. So we kind of rely on just the bin ambassadors to go and check the bin before it's being lifted. So there is, I guess, a technological barrier at the moment to fully maximising the effectiveness of the system.
So no one's using RFID in this way that we're talking about here.
I can't comment on other jurisdictions in terms of the ones we're aware of, RFID isn't used universally. And for example, when we talk to Penrith Council in Australia, who've got quite an extensive focus on education, they don't have any RFIDs in their bins, and they don't rely on that technology, partly because it can be prone to misreadings. So we did opt to roll it out at the time when we rolled out our service, but we haven't fully maximized the functionality of it. So there are some pros and cons with RFIDs and bins. Obviously, there's an added cost to adding it into the bin at the time of rollout as well.
You can follow up, and then Councillor Morgan.
My final question was just about process, because this is a noting paper and we were asked to note the options with the highest opportunity value. So I was just curious what's going to happen from here. You're going to come back to this committee with a recommendation?
So we don't have any recommendations at the moment because we were focused on reporting back to you on the pros and cons and the benefits and costs of the different options, and to gather your feedback in terms of what you think might be worth investigating further. We've recommended looking at 4 of those, as noted in the recommendations. However, that is based on our assessment against those criteria. Ultimately, it would be good to get some feedback on whether you consider those worth further investigating. And I note that some of those, and particularly the option around mandatory upsizing of bins, there is a certain, I guess we want to have a certain political comfort with that option before we look further into this.
And before I pass to Councillor Morgan, just noting under recommendation 4 that's in discussion, we will have that conversation as elected members around what direction we wish to provide to officers today. Councillor Morgan.
Oh, kia ora. I just want to say, look, thank you so much for the presentations last week and for all the reporting. So I'm not normally here, but it's lovely to read everything that's going on, and I really value your excellent information. And I just go back to what was raised around that figure on page 13 in Diligent Part 22 and the rubbish and contamination. And, you know, it's so encouraging to see all the green and then a little bit of red. And so we know the recidivists, shall we say. And I guess I just wonder is, you know, if we go down that, we'll take that bin away and that 3 strike, you know, a place of if I gave up on people getting it right, then it could be quite a mess, you know. And so I wonder is there more damage to be done by taking the bins away? Because what would that look like in the community, and what are they going to do with their rubbish potentially, as opposed to keep fighting the fight kind of thing, and inevitably you get there, inevitably you do win. And I look at this and we're winning to a large degree, which is fabulous. So just wondered if you had thoughts on the contamination with no bins.
I'm happy to speak briefly to that if you like. From what I've read in the research, there are a couple of different drivers that have been identified and why people are continually contaminating. There is a fairly large element of wish cycling, so people wanting to do the right thing but kind of just hoping if they put it in the bin it'll get recycled. And so obviously that shows up as contamination and perhaps mostly orange stickers if they then respond to the feedback they're receiving. You then have a separate group that has also come up in the research where people just don't feel engaged with recycling as a whole, and perhaps the behaviour change methods that we might try to do that activate social norms might not be as effective for people who are just sort of using it as an extra rubbish bin. But I think that's where some of the measures that we've outlined, where we're looking at, are your general waste bins too small? And so you're not even really getting the chance to use the recycling bin the way that you could, and so you're just using it as an overflow because those bins are too small. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure it answers your question totally, but it's just recognising there are different drivers we've seen come up. And so it might be that some actions are targeting one group and others might actually target another. But I do take your point on removing the opportunity altogether. Yeah.
I might just add to that as well that obviously the range of options, the 10 options that we looked into, some of them are about effectively avoiding future contamination, and that's kind of a measure like checking whether if someone downsizes or has a downsize request that we actually don't add to the problem unintentionally. Then you've got measures that are actually more about the education part, so the the face-to-face engagement. This is something that Penrith Council, for example, does, but it is resource intensive if you have 2 or 3 people in a targeted way going to those households and then, either assessing how they can improve their household system. And in a perfect world, we would have the resources to do that so that we don't jump to the conclusion of, well, let's just pull the bin out, and that kind of fixes the problem, but doesn't fix the behaviour long term. So I guess there is a balance to be struck between those just different measures, and I guess the AI option in particular isn't necessarily a way to fix that behaviour, but it's a way to potentially identify the problem earlier so that we can actually do something about it. With the bin ambassadors, it might take 6 months before you actually get to the property and you identify where it is. So I guess it's a question of what's the right balance between those approaches. We didn't rank the personal engagement very highly, mainly because there's quite a significant resource requirement. If you believe that's something that we should look into further, then we can do that. It's just where you see the priorities lie.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Yes, and like everyone else, the report was great. It's all those methods that we can engage here are fantastic and great to look into. The question I had around when you when the bin gets stickered and you say they engaged there, is it with the bin or do people actually get face to face? Do we know that with people?
There may be some interaction between bin ambassadors and households. Usually it's more coincidental if the householder is at home. Normally the bin sticker process happens without the householder being involved. So it is in some ways, even though the bin inspectors are out there and they're visible, you don't necessarily have that contact with the household. I guess that's where that option, which one it was, to actually engage directly with households, that option would fill that gap. So once we know what the contamination is, then we go and target that particular household rather than the area, because it's one thing we haven't got in this report, which we did show in the presentation, was a table where we had contamination shown by ward, and we can also break it down by suburb, and there are quite big differences. But when you dive deeper into this data, we can now map, because every household effectively gets visited every 6 months, we can now map those red, orange and red stickers. And when you look at the map, some of them are literally quite random, but some areas are clusters and there's a number of households quite close together. So ultimately it comes down to the household. Some of it can be done in clusters and we might do a flyer drop, but ultimately a lot of these issues it might be quite specific. It could be language barriers, it could be wish cycling, it could be they just don't know, or they might just moved into the area from another council area. So there's all these factors that play a role.
My follow-up question is, how long have we been not meeting our target and therefore paying? How many months has that been?
33 years. Well, in the first year we didn't pay the penalty fees because the first year that wasn't in place, but effectively the penalties have applied for the last 2 financial years plus the last 3, the current financial year.
We're going to go Councillor Edwards, then back to Councillor Mitchell.
Thanks. I'm very interested in the RFID option J, or paragraph 62. And I'm just wondering how feasible it is if once we get some comfort that the RFID thing could work. And so the driver has arrived for the second time at a household that's contaminated before. He's checking the bin before he loads it into the hopper and he sees that it's contaminated again. Is there an opportunity, because that bin's going to be left there full of recycling, which is going to be a bit of a problem for the household, who's going to think, well, what am I going to do next? Is there an opportunity to attach something to that bin along the lines of, call this number? And so the person's going to call. I mean, this is going to take some resources, but we're spending $1 million in this area already. And then we can, if it's an issue with the landlord refusing to provide a bigger bin or something else that we might be able to sort, we can make some progress with that household. Is that the way to?
That's right on the money. So in some ways, in some cases, that's already happening. So one of the officers actually is available to do some of that work in response to repeated contamination. So some of it is already happening. I guess the RFID option really comes in. Let me start differently. The reason why we've implemented our bin removal process is because we couldn't clearly identify the bin that is at question and prevent it from being emptied. So the only way of stopping that was we need to remove the bin. If the RFID system can be made to work so that it literally just prevents the bin from being lifted because it has a history of contamination, the driver will jump out, check whether the bin is contaminated. If it's not, it could just come off the list and we're good. But if it is contaminated, then we can either leave a sticker or provide relevant further information to that household. And actually, if that can be made to work, there may not be a need to remove bins at all, because it would just continually refuse to lift the bin until such time as it's no longer contaminated. So it really is an option that we're quite interested in, because we can see that it might actually avoid some of the bin removals, which are also quite resource intensive to carry out.
Councillor Mitchell.
Well, just in terms of the costs of these things, which have been mentioned already, and I've seen some commentary online that this is just another thing pushing up our rates. Is this rates funded, or is this funded out of the waste levy, which can only be spent on waste minimisation?
It's a bit of both. So it's a targeted rate that applies to the curbside service, and clearly the contamination penalties and some of the educational cost comes out of the targeted rate for the curbside service. Although in practice, we have also relied on the waste levy, given the significant amount of money required to do the education, to fund that. Now, if you look at the table that shows the costs incurred per year, I'm not suggesting at all that you can run a service without doing any education. I think that would be the wrong assumption to make. And the feedback from Penrith was very clear in Australia that when they tried to dial back on education, they saw contamination going up. So I think there will always be a certain level of education required. The question is how much. But in a perfect world, if everyone did the right thing, the reality is we could save $1 million and the costs to residents would actually be significantly lower. And so that's probably one of the messages that would be useful to keep in mind, is that ultimately we're doing the work to reduce contamination because we want to avoid some of that cost, not because we want to load the ratepayer up with further costs.
Yeah. Thank you. And there was also a suggestion that contamination is a byproduct of this new system we introduced, that the system's at fault. But presumably there was contamination in our old system and in any system of collecting in this way.
Yeah, there was definitely contamination in the previous system. I guess the difference was that because it was curbside, it was sorted at the curbside. If it was very significantly contaminated, it was just left behind and it didn't even enter the system. And obviously that's much harder to do when it's hidden in a bin, hence why you need to look at other measures like AI, RFID, and all those other things.
And I'll add on to that as well, Yun, that obviously the community recycling stations were heavily contaminated, and that's where a lot of dumping occurred, and our stream of recycling from that just became waste, which was very unfortunate. Any further questions? Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, it's touching on the face-to-face aspect a bit. Like for me, really understanding why people are contaminating is probably like the first port before we try and work out how to fix it. So I wonder, have we done any face-to-face stuff now, or is it really that option of doing the face-to-face stuff that will really give us those insights?
Again, my apologies because I am quite new to the team, but as I understand, the research I've been referring to was done by the Behaviour Change Campaign team at VMLYR, and they did essentially a survey and like workshop style engagement with residents. So that was a snapshot of it, but I'm not sure if there was any broader.
Yep, that's correct. So we did do targeted workshops with a selection of residents to dive into, the reasons of why contamination happens. So that gives us a good overview of the different variety of reasons. Obviously, any particular household, the reason might be quite specific. So unless you engage face to face with them, you may not understand their particular reason of why it happens, and you can't necessarily help it. And it might be because the bin is too small for rubbish. It could be. You can only find out so much from surveys and then try to find a correlation between contamination and whether the bin is too small, for example. That's where that face-to-face engagement comes in. We do know from one of the officers that does engage with what can sometimes be quite testing relationships, that there are households out there that just don't care, or they just don't want to engage, or they think council is just going out to get them. So that is something that I don't think we can easily resolve. But there will be other reasons that we can probably help with just by better engagement. We just have to be aware that there is a resource implication. It just relies on time and people to do that.
Any final questions before we go into discussion? Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, my question's on option H, which was the mandatory bin size increase if their bin is too small. And it talks a bit about we might have to change some policies. Just wondering why would that have to be done like in the next LTP, or could that be done sooner? I understand not charging the change fee and waivering that, which is fine. But if we just give them a bigger bin and their next rates bill has the bigger charge on it, I don't know why we'd have to.
So we'd have to do it. We have to do a little bit more investigation into the feasibility exactly of how it will work. But in terms of implementing it in principle, if it's feasible from a legal point of view, we can easily waive the change fee and just ask the contractor to swap the bin for a bigger version, and then the targeted rate would be reflected in the following rating year. So I think from an implementation point of view, it wouldn't be particularly hard. It's more around the do we have the legal ability to do this?
Yeah.
Councillor Parkin?
Kia ora, thank you for the report. I'm just wondering, with that option of upsizing the bin, how hard would it be to do a trial and just see whether or not it actually makes a difference?
Before we do a trial, I think it would be prudent to just make sure that we can do it and how this would work. As I said, implementing it wouldn't be too difficult, be it on a trial or on an ongoing basis. And in essence, I don't think the numbers would be very significant, because usually it's you come across that issue, the bin ambassadors might pick that up. They might notify us, hey, can you might want to have a look at these 10 households. So I don't think in terms of the numbers, they wouldn't be massive, I don't think. But it comes down to are we on solid ground before we go down this path?
Councillor Brown?
Yoon, so just asking about if there was a potential for a trial, would you differentiate between houses that are rentals and houses that are owner occupied? Because there's many rentals that have large families in them and they have the tiniest bin, and that's not by choice, that's by landlord trying to, use the cheapest option. So would there be a difference between the two?
I would say yes, because anecdotally, what you've just described is kind of what we have heard. I guess it's difficult to put some real numbers on this, but we could certainly treat them differently, because ultimately, if you're talking directly to the homeowner, it's different than when you're talking to someone that's in a rental property and they actually don't have any ability to influence that decision. But clearly it's not. If the bin is too small and it's not suitable, I mean, one could say that if we upsize, we're forcing additional cost on the household. But actually, if the household selected the bin according to its waste volumes they would have selected a bigger bin in the first case, and there wouldn't be any additional cost. So I guess we just have to work through exactly how this would work and how we would engage with affected properties and householders.
Any follow-up questions, Councillor Brown? Thank you. Any final question from members? Final question, Deputy Mayor Loss.
Thank you. It's probably more a statement really, but just in line with what...
If it's a statement, you can hold it for the discussion.
In line with what Councillor Brown said about landlords and things like that, have we got a program yet, or depending on what we go, to actually start engaging with tenancy agencies and things like that? Because it sounds like a lot of education needs to go in there as well.
We don't have a program yet. That would have to be developed, and again, I just want to emphasise the point that ultimately there are resourcing implications if we do something additional, and that might mean reprioritising or deprioritising other resource recovery work we're doing. Having said that, and particularly in relation to Kāinga Ora, we are already talking to Kāinga Ora when we identify problem properties, and upsizing or changing the bin size in that instance is actually a lot simpler. And Kāinga Ora has property managers that we work with. So there is, I guess, a clearer path than perhaps on a property where Kāinga Ora is not involved.
If members now pay attention to page 7, we've got our recommendations there. One notes that the work undertaken to date to minimise contamination. 2, notes the analysis on further opportunities to reduce recycling contamination. 3, notes the following 4 options as offering highest opportunity value. A, bin audits before actioning a downsize request. B, RFID and suspension of service. C, mandatory bin size increase in response to repeat contamination and or overflow of rubbish bin. And D, artificial intelligence and real-time tracking. We've also got recommendation 4, which we're not moving at this point, but we will be having a discussion. And my intention is to take a break after the discussion to update the recommendations accordingly to reflect option 4. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Anyone want to open discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
Happy to. I've got quite a long list, so I'm not sure you will want to incorporate them all into recommendations, but thank you again for the paper and the different options that we've discussed. Just picking up on a couple of points in the paper and that have been made around the table today. One is that our contamination problem is with a really small number of people. And there's kind of 2 ways we can deal with it. One is to get those people to use the system properly, or the second one is to try and accommodate them not using the system properly. And just to note at a very high level that the 4 kind of preferred opportunities here are all about accommodating them not using the system properly. And I think there are some opportunities in there to still push for behaviour change. Particularly for me, I really see the RFID option, if we can get that going, as a way to enhance and make more efficient our bin stickering program. And if we can do that, and it can be a lot more responsive, like you were saying, particular bins not being picked up on particular days instead of just being taken away, then we can use that to push for behaviour change. So I think the 2 for me are the technology ones. The RFID and the AI have the biggest potential to have the biggest impact, and the other 2 are quite simple, but probably will have quite small impact. Just to comment on a couple of other things, just as we've been talking around the table. One is that we have spent a lot of money and a lot of time on education, and I commend the work that's been done there. And I don't really think there's a lot more we can do to tell people how to use the system properly, other than people who, for various reasons, haven't been able to understand that messaging. And I think it's probably language barriers and things like that that I'm referring to. Just tying that into the examination of contamination and this concept of wish cycling, and noting that a lot of, for example, the number 1, I think, was soft plastics. And we've already done education that said don't put soft plastics into your bin. I just wonder if there's any value of turning that conversation around to the only way to recycle soft plastics is to take them to your supermarket and put them in that bin there. And if you're not going to do that, they go in your red bin. And because there are people who want to do the right thing, who do wish that they could recycle everything that comes through the door. So I think a simple message, and lids are other things, that there is a way to recycle this. This is the way. It's not putting it in your yellow bin. And then the final thing, I think there's been some talk about tenancy and rentals, and this is discussed every time we talk about bin sizes. And I think potentially you and we could get into our own bylaw and make it a requirement, but also there's been a lot of work done in the past few years about tenancy rights, the rights to warm, dry homes. And I wonder if there's an advocacy piece to advocate for government that actually having a right-sized rubbish bin is another tenant, it could be another basic right of tenancy, that tenants can choose what size bins they have. It's a basic right of them renting a property. So just a few thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Some thought-provoking comments. Next up, Councillor Edwards.
Well, as often the case, Andy Mitchell has said it way better than I can. Pretty much agree with everything he said. I'm very much in favour of investigating this RFID option, as it seems to me that that brings to a head situations where households are, for whatever reason, not doing what they should do with the recycling bins. And when they make contact with the council, if it turns out it's a landlord thing, we can try and intervene. And if that doesn't work, if we've got a stick in the mud landlord, after we've investigated the legality of this, maybe that's where the compulsory upsize comes in. This is an excellent report, and it brings to mind the phrase that sometimes you have to invest to save. This is costing us an awful lot of money every year, and you've said a number of times, you've got to remember this could cost some resources. Well, maybe we have to dedicate initially some resources for some long-term savings.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Totally supportive of the previous councillors, and I just think this engagement process right here, we've got opportunities with the rubbish and for council to build relationships on a positive note and to get people engaged in our system. So things like what Andy said, we're educating. If we can do that in the right way through our messaging, that's a positive reinforcement of councils actually helping them. So yeah, totally support all those ideas. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, do same, support what the other councillors said. And just to add to it, I think there's several groups that you've explained. There's groups that just don't want to do it for whatever reason. There's other groups that are not doing it, wanting to do it, wishful thinking, whatever it's called. And then I think there's the third group, which is always could be leveraged, and I see it in my own street a lot. I'm on Wellington Road, and in other rental areas where the two bins are too small for the house, and I think that part is going to grow. The emergency housing has been halved, and people have been pushed out of emergency housing and have been told to move in with their families. So we are going to see a really big increase in overcrowding in the places that shouldn't be overcrowded. So I just think maybe there's a possibility, because you have to use all the tools in the toolbox to encourage landlords to be a little bit more supportive, that we can find a way that actually identifies and supports that house and whoever the tenants are in it, that making it fit for purpose, but also there's going to be a bit of a blowout in those areas where families who are mostly vulnerable themselves are being asked to take in more families because they can't go into emergency housing. And those numbers are increasing significantly and really quickly. Lower Hutt's emergency housing has more than halved, and that's not from them going into houses. So this could be just another tool as well.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Is there any other further comment? Any further comment from people that haven't spoken so far? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, fully support everything that's been said and support those four options and the recommendations. The one I probably would also be keen to see a bit of work done on is that face-to-face interaction, so we can really understand the why people are doing what they're doing. And even within the subgroups, like there's the group that's just disenfranchised and doesn't believe in the council system. why is that? Is it because they think it's all being shipped off seas on barges, or like, what's the reason why they're like that? And if it's that, then we can educate them. If they purely just don't care, take the bin off them. Like, it saves everyone money. Just take the yellow bin away, if that's why they are doing the contamination. If they're contaminating because their landlord has gone for the absolute cheapest bin, then swap the bins over and we'll cover the cost. And the next rate bill will have that new bid on there. We can set rates for anything in the city. So I don't see there being too much of an issue there of just changing the rate and giving them the bigger bin. It may even work out financially that we're actually better off giving them a bigger bin and not even charging them for it if the contamination drops. It may even be cost neutral. But all the initiatives that we're talking about do have costs, but so does the contamination fees. And we can see from the figures, when we spend more in education and bin ambassadors, the contamination rates come down, which is the outcome we want. So yeah, fully supportive of the 4 in front of us, but yeah, that understanding more about why people are doing what they're doing, I think, is a really key part of this.
Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, I support the comments of my colleagues, and I'd just like to go back to what I mentioned right at the beginning, that was about working with our communities, because obviously there's some hard to reach pockets of our community, and we don't know the reasons why or wherefore. So I'd certainly like to encourage, linking with marae, more with marae schools, where these pockets of contamination are, rather than it being a council approach. Just use the people in the community to try and educate. I think your social media campaign, the back of the bus stuff is really, really good, but for some it's not working. So maybe we need to use another way of delivering those messages, but keep up the great work.
Any final comment? Councillor Mitchell, I'll give you a bit of discretion.
Yeah, no, it is just a small one, and there was some talk of trials here, and I literally asked for examples from other councils. So whatever it is that we do progress with, if our officers can monitor really closely what the impact is, that we have a good opportunity for us to share with councils with some kind of authority, rather than we think this bit worked. Or
Thank you, members. Comment from myself briefly. Thank you to the team as well as noted. The report and the work behind it as well is fantastic. And it is an ongoing piece of work that we need to really grapple with. So thank you for providing us this information following on from the request from our last committee meeting. I support many of the comments made by you all that this is something we do need to invest to save in. As Councillor Edwards said, it's something that we need to continually work on. And even as our contamination levels get lower and lower, we still need to continue the work, because the last thing we want to see is a tide change completely if we pull away from doing those supportive measures in our community. What we're going to do is take a 5-minute break. I'll work with Judy to kind of summarise the feedback and make sure it's captured well. So if you can all be back at we'll call it 4:55, 10 minutes. Oh, 2:55, apologies. Kia ora, welcome back, team. Thank you for giving us that time to get these additional recommendations. If all members have a read, I'll read them out for you though. The new 5 is asks officers to investigate amending our own bylaw to require suitably sized bins. 6 asks officers to advocate to government for right-sized bins to be the right of any tenant of a rental property. 7 considers conducting a trial of engaging face-to-face with households where repeated contamination has been identified. 8 supports officers investigating the 4 highest value opportunities identified in the report. And 9 requests officers report back on the outcomes of their investigations at a future meeting. Are there any questions on those recommendations? No. And Councillor Mitchell, you're still happy as the seconder? Fantastic. That being the case, I now put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Councillors that aren't members, you are more than welcome to stay, but also feel free to depart whenever you wish as well. We're now moving on to our next substantial item. We are on page 33. I'm working up Gaynor Muller, Advisor Waste Minimisation and Units remaining at the table. Welcome up, Gaynor.
Well, Chair, we will have Jeff Roberts, Waste Manager, take this paper.
Apologies. Welcome, Jeff. Over to you. Again, noting that, sorry, I was on the wrong page. Here we go. Noting that the report has been read by members. If there's anything you wish to highlight, please do so. Otherwise, we're open for questions.
Kia ora koutou. Just the only thing on para 3, I'm just noting that the scheduling of this committee and the Hutt Valley Shared Services Committee are not entirely sympathetic to one another. There is actually a new paper already for the Hutt Valley Shared Services Committee this month, but that should be available soon. So if you want to stay up to date with the landfill, I'd check in on that agenda because there is some more information there. Oh, sorry, a bit far from the mic. Other than that, I'm just noting that the voucher scheme continues to be very successful. Thanks to Gaynor for facilitating that and working on that program with Earthlink. Yes, but other than that, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions from members? Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, I just had one which was about the second bin clips, and great that we're able to offer that and that it's been done to quite a few properties and proven to be of use. So I wondered what the plan is for letting other residents know that that's an option to them. I know last time the wind blew terribly down my street. We could have done with some second bin clips that day.
So my understanding is that we'd respond to any requests for those bin latches for people who needed them. I'm not entirely sure of the extent of our comms on their availability to residents at the moment. Ewan, do you know where we advertise that?
We do have it on our website, and it is one of the options in the when you go in to make a request for a change. So that is one of the drop-down menus. I'm just going to quickly ask my colleague James Kane. I'm pretty sure we did have a social media post, at least on social media,
website and on the job.
Apologies, James. If you can come up to the table so we can hear you, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's only on our website, raw form, and it has gone out on social media. Absolutely open to putting that out more often, just letting people know when they can come in. I'd be interested to know if we could get it out via more of our neighbourhood hubs and let people know that they could go to the neighbourhood hubs as well, because people love going to those in general.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Earthlink offer a great service in Wingate, and I use them frequently, go down there. But I've been made aware that just through kōrero with residents that not many people actually know about the service that they offer. So do we, Hutt City Council, promote their services on our website, or do we sort of, I know they're an independent business, but it'd be great to see us giving them a bit of a heads up.
We absolutely do. Yes, we've made a video on Earthlink introducing them. We have them on our website. We share Earthlink's amazing mahi whenever possible, depending on the kind of thing, be it like their shop, be it dropping different things off and what have you. Take, for example, the planned video that we have to promote the resource recovery voucher at the landfill. That will also include a thing where it's just like, of course, if everything you have is recyclable or repairable, what have you, please take it to Earthlink in the first instance for free. So wherever we can, we will drop it in. And the thing is people really like Earthlink as well. So those people who know about it, like about it. So like, it's in com's best interest to shout about Earthlink because it's content that makes people happy.
And just a second question, just in regards to the civil share, which I think it's a great idea, you know, for waste construction and demolition. But also, is there something, you know, that the local person who's just demolishing the shed or the back shed, I know you can go on Marketplace, but it's not a space that I particularly want to go on. Is there a space that me as a resident can go to find out who can take away my concrete roof tiles?
Yeah, I think, so yes, that's a good question. I mean, it's something that we're aware of, and we've been talking in the team about the Otaihanga Zero Waste Hub, which is recently set up specifically to handle small amounts of, I guess, construction waste or materials, so short lengths of timber and reusable materials for construction purposes. So it would fit that bill in terms of a small garden shed that was being demolished or something like that. So we're in the early stages of investigating either that as a standalone option for the Hutt or something that we could incorporate into Earthlink's activities.
Any last questions? Great. In that case, I'll move the recommendation that the committee receives and notes the update on various solid waste management and minimisation matters. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
Try that one. Here we go. Yeah, thanks again to officers for all the work being done, and to James and the team for the comms work in particular. I think Councillor Shaw's follow-up question to mine kind of illustrated the point that we need to just keep those messages coming out, because some people have seen them and other people haven't seen them. We're coming up to the crazy windy spring season, so any messages about those double clips in the next couple of months would be really good. I think there's probably low awareness that they are available. I've certainly heard of them myself, but the neighbourhood hubs, I think, are another really good idea. Lots of people have been finding out our bins and how to use them properly through there, so thank you.
I now am going to put the motion. All in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. I declare that carried. Thank you, Jeff. We're now moving on to page 39 for the update on Council's climate change work. Want to welcome up Miriam Randolph, Senior Advisor, Climate and Sustainability, to the table alongside Yuen. As always, please take your report as fully read by members. If there's anything you wish to highlight, please do so, then we'll open for questions.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you. So just a few notes on the report before we begin. It's that time of year again, so there's two quite lengthy updates on both our climate action plan, which is internal, and then the climate climate action pathway as well. So hopefully you managed to look through all of those actions and updates. I also wanted to acknowledge that our climate action campaign, which is publicly out right now, it's really fun and bright and happy. And I wanted to just give a special mihi to James, who was just at the table before. He spent a lot of time with myself and you in developing the campaign, along with our consultants, as well as the members who are in the photos themselves. We didn't put this in the report, but most of them were streetcast, so that means literally approaching people, asking if they're willing to partake. So a big thank you to them, because they didn't have to say yes, but they chose to, and they were really interested in being involved. So yes, the last thing I wanted to note was the information on our preparing for our second round of the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund. There may be a little bit of confusion between This fund, and also what is currently out at the moment, is the Climate Action Fund. That is open until October this year. So I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown on the differences about them. So it's open until October this year. That fund has been run by the Connected Communities team primarily. And it was kind of put together, it's the first time they're running it, put together from budgets that have come from the Local Projects Fund and the Community Engagement Fund. This is probably ringing a bell for all of you, but individuals and groups as well as registered charities and organisations can apply for funding in that. And they must, so the criteria is around looking at delivering or supporting the actions in the climate action pathway, which is the update that we had. So that's kind of some of the context around what that fund is seeking to achieve, whereas the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund has a focus on legal entities only being able to apply. It's got, and it's asking for specific emissions reductions outcomes. So while there is a lot of crossover, there are some differences between the two funds. And it might be a little bit confusing having two climate action funds, but I also think it's pretty great that we get to have two climate action funds that are both supporting outcomes. So yeah, that's all. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Miriam. And agree, it's been a bit of a time to get the second fund off the ground and running, but it's fantastic. We're now in a position where we have two different funds that the community can apply for that are supporting our climate ambitions for our city as well. Questions, Councillor Mitchell first.
Well, just following up on that topic, I think another big difference, right, is that the bigger fund, I'll call it that one, forget the names, is a co-funding fund, and the other ones are available to community groups. Like, is it? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's correct. And the co-funding element was definitely discussed at length during the first round, and seen as a really important factor as well in the way that we're kind of increasing our impact in the city. Further questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, and thank you for the updates on all the work that's progressing under those different carbon programs. I just had a couple of questions about the pathway. In fact, a couple of smaller ones as well, which I might just email through. But one was about bus priority, and it says there's limited progress. It kind of talks about the potential for progress under Riverlink, and when it says limited progress, I hope that means that there's been limited progress in implementing bus priority lanes, but that there's an awful lot of planning going on for Riverlink.
Yeah, so in this particular case, I referred to limited progress on actually implementing those bus priority measures, not in terms of planning work, but actually seeing the results of it.
Thank you. And the other question I had on page 66, there's a half a dozen actions which are around, I guess, secondhand materials and education. So pre-loved clothing, scrap metal, some stuff in there about enviro schools and supplying plants and advice. And all of them, their current status is underway and continuing. And I just kind of wondered for all of them what the action is. Because if they're already underway and nothing's changing, then it feels like they're kind of completed actually, but kind of what the action points are around those different areas.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it sort of illustrates the challenge around what are we reporting against. So when the Climate Action Pathway was put together, it didn't just cover new projects or things that we're planning to do. It also tried to capture some of the stuff that's already happening and that's going to continue to happen. And metal recycling is one of those things that is, we wouldn't say it's completed because it's continuing. So there are a number of actions that I would actually reference as BAU, business as usual, as opposed to a thing that we're trying to change. And that, you know, in terms of lessons learned, is probably something that we could do differently if there was a new plan or a new pathway being developed at some stage, is that we actually differentiate between here's some ongoing things that are just happening regardless, and they don't stop, but they also don't get completed. And then there are things that we actually want to change so that the system changes, like new bus priority measures, for example, or buses being electrified or more EV charging stations. It's more of a project type process where there's a starting point and there's an end point. So maybe it's just a matter of how we report against them, and maybe we split them out. We have opted to just leave it in the same format that we did last time, so it's easy to compare.
Yeah, and I did feel that there could be some actions or some KPIs or whatever wrapped around some of those if we want to increase the number of places that people can, or the use of those places, or our comms around those places. There are actions we could take around those things, but that's just how we can capture those in the right way.
Any other questions? No, and that being the case, I then move on page 39, the 3 noting recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Any discussion? Councillor Morgan.
Kia ora. Can I just say ngā mihi kia koutou to all of you? I think this is so refreshing to read and see the way that you've reported. I love the campaign. It's fantastic. It's fun. It's exciting. Gets a really strong message across in such a great way. And the reporting is so clear. And I feel like I could pick this report up and take it to a community meeting or take it to a group, and they'd see it because of the visual impact it has and see the progress, but also have an understanding of everything that's kind of going on in the city, which is huge. So thank you for a really good job.
Any other comment? Councillor Shaw.
Actually, Councillor Morgan took the words out of my mouth. I wanted to congratulate you on the work on the table as well too. I think the traffic light system works really well. It's an easy read. It gives us some focus for what we've done, great work, what we need to do, and all that sort of stuff. And it is, as Councillor Morgan said, it's so much easier for us to go back out to the community and say this is what's happening in this space. So thank you for the great work being done.
And finally, I'll echo those comments as well and acknowledging Alison and Ewan, now having a full team. It's fantastic to see the work that's been progressed and able to continue with all of your involvement and expertise. It's getting great outcomes for our community, and the reporting really helps to show that as well. Often narrative can kind of give some information, but when we've got the data there to back it up as well, it gives a really clear message to our community around the level of investment and what we're getting in return. So thank you all. I now move the motion. All in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. I declare that carried. Ewan and Miriam, if you stay there, we're now moving on to page 72 for the retrospective approval for submissions on the second emissions reduction plan. Is there anything to add from officers? Speaks for itself.
Just to note that the submission has been sent out on time, so it was sent the Friday before, it was due on Sunday. Can't remember the dates now, but yeah, so it's been submitted and confirmed that it's been received.
Wonderful. Any questions from members? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Great submission. I have one piece of feedback, which I'll save for a moment, but a question about the process. So what happens now? Does the government read all these submissions and hopefully make some amendments and table an amended proposal?
Yes, so my understanding is that they go through a process of assessing all of the submissions. Often they are synthesised into areas of feedback because they'll have thousands of submissions, and then they look to, there'll be a briefing to that in that process to decide what feedback gets taken on board and what changes will come as a result of the consultation.
Any questions from other members? No, in that case, I will put the recommendation the memo and to recently approve submission to the government's consultation on the second emissions reduction plan attached as Appendix 1 to the memo. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Parkin. Any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, it was just a brief comment and thinking ahead to future submissions, I guess, that this submission does a really good job of identifying some problems that we have with the plan. I think our officers could probably also feel comfortable to suggest some solutions to those problems. There's a really great statement in there I 1000% agree with. We think there's a critical opportunity for customer-generated electricity to enable and speed up electrification. You know, kind of how do we see that actually looking? Is it government subsidies? Is it removing barriers? So you know, kind of suggesting solutions to be taken on board as well, rather than just identifying the problems. But it's a really good submission. Thank you.
Any other comment? I'm just noting as well, thank you for all the support pulling this together, and noting for members, obviously sometimes submissions fall outside our normal meeting calendar, and so thank you for your grace as well as we submitted, as we did. Fantastic. I now put the recommendations. All in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. I declare that carried. We're now moving on to page 77 for the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee Forward Programme. Just noting on this as well, obviously we've got one more meeting this calendar year, as the year has gone quite quickly. I've already had a conversation with officers around what's coming up next year for 2025. And so if members do have any suggestions or things they wish to see, please contact me after the meeting and I'll happily feed that into the conversation with officers later this year. It's important for us to have that plan locked and loaded for the whole calendar year so we know what expectations are being set and we know where the kind of energy is going as well. Is there any questions on the Forward Programme? Nope. Happy to move that the committee receives and notes the Forward Programme for the remainder of 2024 attached as Appendix 1 to the report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Parkin. All in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. I declare that carried. Agenda item 10, questions. I've received no questions ahead of the meeting. So now moving to item 11, our closing karakia. Please join in. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia e te urutapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa i te arataka tū. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakaahirihi ake ki runga, kia wātea, kia wātea. Ai rā, ko wātea, hau, pai mārire.